This special release podcast episode was originally recorded during the 2022 Beyond Clean Expert Series Conference, the industry's only 100% PowerPoint-free educational event. If you prefer to watch this interview, you can access it and over 200 other CE programs by visiting beyondclean.net. Thanks for listening and keep fighting dirty.
Hey, Sterile Processing Universe, welcome back to the Expert Series Conference. I want to thank you again for choosing to spend your Friday with us. We've got a long lineup of experts this Friday lined up for some excellent conversations, and this one is an exciting one. Before we get into it, I want to give a brief thank you to our event partner, Power Supply. Definitely check them out for content around supply chain, and also our event collaborator, First Case. First Case is our OR-based platform, and our partner there with which we're able to get the nursing credits for this conference, and so thanks to them. Today's presentation is going to be about take those new ideas off the shelf, a little bit of a rock and roll theme for you. And joining us today, we've got Dustin Patterson. He is the Regional Sales Manager with LogiQuip Healthcare Storage Solutions. He is one of the many Beyond Clean experts, and his series is about healthcare storage specifically. And so Dustin, in his work, partners with hospitals and surgery centers to develop tailored solutions around best practices, lean principles, and industry-leading storage equipment. Joining us again, hosting this conversation, is going to be Hank Balch, the founder and president of Beyond Clean. Hank's passionate about seeing these sterile processing professionals be equipped to fight dirty every instrument, every time. So thank you again for joining us. Today's conversation is going to take a deep dive into some common flaws that we see in sterile processing storage areas, maybe some citation risks associated with that. We'll look at some concepts for improving efficiency and sterility practices in sterile storage area. So buckle up, get ready to discover the important storage concepts that will save you from stress and ensure your patient trays are sterile and ready and can be found when the patient is ready for them. So join me in welcoming in Dustin and Hank.
What's up, Sterile Processing Universe, and welcome, Dustin, to your first Expert Series conference with us.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. And
for those of y'all who are tuning in, if this is your first session of the day, I just want to lay this out. This is PowerPoint free, so we're not going to be doing any slides. We're going to be having a lot of great education. Yeah, raise the roof if you can't see that. And second to that, if you're tuning in after the fact on the podcast, just know we're going to have some audience and engagement and questions. We don't want you to feel left out on the podcast, but if you tune in live, give us your questions throughout the session, and we'll stop what we're doing and we'll engage and answer and spotlight all those conversations. So don't hold them to the end, I guess is what I'm saying. This is going to be an engaging, collaborative show and an exciting show about healthcare storage. But before we get going, I'm starting all these sessions today with some pop quizzes to get our experts warmed up and just ready to educate. So, Dustin, I'm going to throw out the first one here.
All right.
If you had to organize your home pantry with a healthcare storage solution, what would it be and why?
Oh, man, that's a great question. And it's a funny story, actually. And this is not pre-planned. Yeah, this is not pre-planned for everyone that's on the conference. So I'm married, I have a wife, and so I do this every day for a living. And she's like, I want to organize the pantry. I'm going to go to Home Depot and get some shelving, which is like sacrilegious to me.
I was going to say, you're like, oh, no.
I'm like, no, that's like my deal. And she's like, no, I got it all planned out and whatever. And so I've learned in my 7 years of marriage, there's some things that I don't argue or fight about. And this was one of them. So I let her go do her thing. And she got it home and it was just like flat shelving and she put all the stuff on it. And she like, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, she's like, this isn't really, working. I can't see stuff. It's falling all over the place. I'm like, well, can I do it? She's like, yeah, sure, do it. So, I would do like parwell baskets, for sure, with dividers. And so you have each food along the way has its own lane. You could even put some little dividers in there, so when you need to buy more paprika before it goes out. You could rotate it, make sure none of your spices go expired. But that's my answer. Parwell baskets. I don't want to take up too much time.
But dude, that's beautiful. Well, for anybody who's on TikTok, there's like this whole TikTok subculture of organizing like home things like pantries, refrigerators, everything else. So if you're as big of a nerd as it sounds like you are for storage, you should tune into that, because I think you'll appreciate all the things that happen. Yeah, check it out. It's like OCD dream, It's like, there's a place for it.
A TikTok influencer. Maybe that's my calling. Let's see.
That's right. That could be your side hustle. Okay, great answer. And that's so funny that you had a story with that, because, that was just a random question. All right, number 2. So this is the second of the pop quiz. If you could pick a superpower that would help you do your job better in healthcare storage, what would that power be?
Oh, man. All right, so everyone who's seen the Avengers, Doctor Strange, like, he can work through all the scenarios in his head. I think I would want that superpower, because, like, in the SPD space, in any healthcare storage space, the problems are so dynamic. It's like you fix one problem, you work to fix a small subset of a deal, and it has, this is the same in all the places, but you have consequences for that, good consequences and bad consequences. And so I would like to be able to quickly have something come up and be able to, play out in my mind all the different ways that it will go, and then select the most optimal one. That would be my superhero power for sure.
Dude, that's great. I didn't even think like that was a power, because I've never seen Doctor Strange. So that's fantastic.
I think it is. I mean, I don't know. We might have some people in here that's going to fact check me on that, but I'm good on that one.
So that's a perfect setup for the last pop quiz, honestly. And it is, what is your favorite what the heck moment out there in seeing how sterile storage or healthcare storage was designed previously? Because you just said you'd love to have the power to see all the implications of how you put these solutions together. But on the back end of that, like, what's the craziest thing that you've seen or you can remember and you're like, what the heck was the designer, the architect thinking when they did this?
Oh, man. There are a lot. I think, I'm trying to think of the best one. Okay, this one keeps coming up to mind. So we worked I'm in Michigan. I won't name who it is, but we worked in a hospital here nearby, and we brought them in. We were doing a space planning conversation with them, where we brought the blueprints up on the screen. We were talking through, they were expanding their ORs, they were expanding their service lines, and I remember the perioperative director was like, well, how big is the sterile processing department? So this was, not excluding decontam, it was just, the clean side. And we did the area function and looked at it, and we told her it was, I forget what it was, but it was minute, 800, 900 square feet, which was like literally a third of what she had originally. And,
right.
It was a what the heck moment. And the funny thing is, like, she like left and she picked up her cell phone and she started making phone calls. Like, there's no way I can, we're going to take on, 2 or 3 or 4 more ORs, and we're going to do it in 2/3 of the space. Right. So that happens all the time, but that's my biggest what the heck moment. Like, they missed the mark. And then, there's this pharmacist office next door to it that's, bigger than the whole clean storage area. So you got to, I'm sure that got commandeered, but that's mine.
I love it. And
do you have one, Hank? Can I turn this back around to you? Do you have one?
Oh, well, I mean, the industry is filled up with what the heck moments. Like, it's just one big what the heck moment, especially in all of these ambulatory surgery centers. You're like, they did not think about sterile processing at all. And when you go to storage, they definitely did not think about anything related to storage, especially if you're looking at, temperature and humidity requirements, for example, or air exchanges. So it's very, like, you struggle to find like one what the heck moment to mention, but that's why. It's not because there's not enough. It's probably because your whole brain is like, oh, well, like yesterday's what the heck moment or what?
Yeah, pick one, right?
Right.
For sure.
And we're going to talk about a piece of that later that you brought up in the new design and the growth of adding ORs and the impact it has on storage. So don't let me forget to come back to that point. But before we get too much further, I know there's going to be folks who are watching today or tuning in who don't know you. They may have seen your awesome cartoon out there. They may have seen some of your bio out there with the Expert Series releases that we've done. But kind of fill in the gaps for us a little bit. You can only tell so much in 150 words about yourself. So, we know what makes you tick at home when it comes to the pantry. But what else is important to know about you? And kind of follow that up with, why do you love this topic of healthcare storage? Like, what about this just gets you going in the mornings?
Oh, man. All right. Perfect. So I would say who I am. I mentioned my wife. I have 3 kids. So first and foremost, I'm a husband and a father to them. So I try to prioritize that and kind of direct everything I do around that. Awesome. But I started at LogiQuip. It was 2007, which is crazy to think about. So 15 years ago, I've been here for 15 years. And I started wrapping pallets in the back. That's how I got started. And I knew how to do space design. I knew how to do computer-aided drafting, and that's a big component of what we do. In meeting with people and drawing and laying out and making sure that everyone understands the whole picture of the project. So I migrated to that, and that's really where I cut my teeth in LogiQuip and really started to find my niche. And people would send me drawings, and I could decipher a way to perhaps do it differently or present different options. And I've always been I'm a Tetris kid, growing up on Game Boy.
I was going to ask you about your kid. Like, have you always been the kind of kid who likes things in place, right? Like Tetris is a good example.
Yeah. So some things, so like my closet's in really good condition. Like my car, which is essentially my office, is like but anyway, yeah. So, but I mean, I've always been able to look for patterns in things, be able to structure things, look at things spatially, and be able to understand. Okay, I'll walk into SBDs quite often and take a look around. And I got a call from somebody yesterday that said, asking me for ideas on how to make it better. And I'm like, and they're telling me, some of the constraints that they have. And I said, I really have to see the space. I have to walk in and but when I get into a space and I can look at it, I can say, well, maybe turning things a different direction or have you thought about this? But I've always had kind of a way of looking at, I was a merchandiser in a grocery store for a long time. And I think that I just kind of gravitated to that, putting stuff on the shelf and putting it on in an organized manner and making sure that stuff's front facing. And it's kind of crazy because this question, it made me think back on a lot of that. And I look back and I'm like, all this stuff is kind of pointing me in this direction because people ask me all the time, what do you do? And I'm like, well, IKEA for healthcare or whatever. But, it's hard to tell people, what we do, and I never would have imagined that I would be doing this for a living. But looking back, I can see how I got here. And why do I love healthcare storage? So healthcare is a great industry to be in, not just from all the volume and all the cool, all the things that people, I want to go into healthcare sales. That was never my thing. But what I think about it being cool in healthcare, and in sales specifically, is like you're helping driving good outcomes. Like there's people there that care deeply about their job, and care deeply about the people that they're caring for. And I get to come in and help them make their world better so that they can go help make someone else's world better. We're in a support function. We're helping them with storage, and we're not directly accessing patient stuff, but what we do matters. And so it's I love being able to meet, and I get to go all across. In the Midwest is where I'm at now, but I've been all across the country over my tenure here, meeting with people and talking with people, and I love solving healthcare storage issues. And the great thing is they're never ending. So it's right. An endless supply of problems to be solved. And so that's also, it's cool. It's what drives me.
I've got a lot of follow-ups. I'm just sitting here like, oh man, where do I start with this? So you gave the story there about on the call with a hospital, they're trying to describe what's going on, and you're like, listen, this is kind of helpful, but it's going to be way more helpful if I can come on site and see it. Mm-hmm. And so my first follow-up is, how much of being good at healthcare storage is an art versus a science? Because I'm assuming, like you alluded to, maybe some tools and things that you use, like maybe some software that helps you kind of plug in. Like, how much of that is that vision piece that you're like, hey, I can walk in a room and then immediately like these overlays start like coming, and I see like all these baskets and everything else, even without sitting down and typing it all into the computer? Like, where do you kind of sit on that spectrum?
So I think it's an art and a science, and so some people can walk into a space and see a wall and be like, oh, that's a 20-foot wall. I can fit 4 or 5 foot units on it. If I have them come out the other way, then I can get 6 18-inch units in there. So that to me, that's part of the art, and it's interesting to think about it that way, because I've never really considered it that way. And then there's the science piece of it. So there are tools to help you out there. I mean, if you like on the disposable sides in sterile processing and in supply chain in the greater hospital, it's math, right? So you have an inventory level, you have a package, which you have the size, and then it's just a matter of what the math is and what you're going to need for that square footage. And then on top of that, what's the usage, and how often you're getting deliveries. So, if you need a 3 or 4 day supply of it, you can do the math and say, okay, well, I'm going to need X amount of racks. Or I have, 800 instrument sets, and we know, on average, how many sets fit on a rack, so you can validate a lot of it. But what I have found is you can apply science to it, and then you get into the space and it's not enough space to do, for all the stuff. So that's when the art comes in. It's like, okay, well, if we move this over here, or if we put this on a track system, if we can, perhaps, maybe, change the workstation layout and maybe increase some storage space there, do some things in the core, maybe change some workflow stuff. Like that's to me like the art piece, but there is definitely, I think, some science behind it, which is good. It helps. I think it helps balance the two out. On
one of your earlier answers too, you kind of alluded to that story of the design that was completely off spec from what the department leader had expected. And that kind of leads me to a question of architects and like these design firms. In your experience, I don't want to paint with a broad brush too much, but in your personal experience, how much do those folks today know about or thinking about storage the way that you and your team think about storage, and is that changing?
So I want to be respectful, but I would say the the gap between what is needed, and this is like operationally. This isn't me. I'm taking my sales hat off and I'm putting on my operations hat. I spend a lot of times at LogiQuip in operations, and so putting on my operations, there's a massive gap between how hospitals are planned and how they function. And you can make that argument with a number of different things, but I think storage is one of the areas where it's missed on the mark the most. For example, I'm working on a hospital, and this is in the ED, so it's out of the sterile processing context, but it's just a picture painted another way. This hospital took one large central supply room that used to, and then they built a new hospital. They split it into 4, and so while the total area of the storerooms were larger, the 2 that were the nearest to the trauma or the highest triaged areas were the smallest, and weren't able to fit all the supplies that they needed to triage patients. So now you're having, ED nurses walking, 30, 50 feet further both ways to get the supplies that they need to triage a patient. It's just, and that, we talk about it all the time here, and it's something that we constantly try to figure out how can we enact change in that way, because it's a major miss, and I think it is getting better in some ways. I think they're doing planning and design meetings, and they are asking leaders in the departments to get involved. And I would, one of the things that I would highly recommend to the people on this call is, if you are going into an expansion or renovation or a new hospital, and maybe you're not the decision maker, talk to who the decision maker is and make sure that they're considering, what you need from a workflow standpoint, what you need from a space allocation to support the operating rooms and to support the patient care that needs to be done. Because the fact of the matter is, storage isn't revenue generating. So they don't think about it. They want to try to make it as small as possible because it doesn't add anything, quote unquote, add anything to the income statement, and it just adds cost to the build. But without those support areas, the only person that suffers is the caregivers.
I guess the only way to create a revenue generating storage area is if we start creating racks out of gold, because
there you go.
You see some increase in value at least.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
But it could increase the cost a little bit, so maybe that's not the most practical idea. I want to highlight something that you said earlier too about sales that I didn't learn until I went over to the dark side, as they say. And I left the hospital space and I came over. And I had this impression of my sales guys and gals as they're always trying to sell me something that I don't need or I don't want. And even the good ones that I liked and I had a good relationship with, I'm like, okay, you're showing up because you got an ulterior motive, and that's to sell me something. Now, there are those folks out there. But what I realize now on the other side, and you kind of highlighted this, if you are a true salesperson, you believe in your solutions and you believe that your solutions are actually going to do something positive for the customer that you're selling to, and you're not trying to sell solutions that are not applicable and are not going to solve problems. And if you're doing that right, a good salesperson and partner is like the best advocate to have, because we, in sterile processing, in the operating room and supply chain, we are not the healthcare storage experts. We may be sterile processing experts, operating room experts, and supply chain experts, but quite frankly, we don't know as much as someone like yourself or all the other folks out there that are in this storage space know about the science, as you mentioned, and the art of really doing this well. So is there anything that you want to add to that kind of salesperson piece, or maybe that assumption out there from the customer that you're here to help, right? Not to just hit the quota.
Yeah, I do. It's funny. I never thought I would be in sales. That it wasn't something that I necessarily intended to do. Like I said, I was an operation manager at LogiQuip in my last role before I moved into sales. And so in my operation role, I was getting called on by people providing office supplies, shipping supplies, freight companies. And still to this day, I mean, we all get the marketing emails. I laugh because I'll send out emails or LinkedIn messages, connecting with people and trying to set up meetings with them. And they get ignored. And then I get, these sales messages and I ignore them. So I guess I can't fault you guys for that. If I'm being 100% transparent, but
it's just human. We're just humans, right?
That's right. So I'll say this, like, the good sales reps out there, and there are good ones, there also are bad ones, are truly the ones that want to make problems go away. So the LogiQuip as a company, we try to value ourselves on, we want to be solution providers. We want to help you make problems go away. We don't want to just sell you something to sell you something. In fact, sometimes we'll go in and do things and we'll make recommendations where we're utilizing or repositioning things that don't necessarily sell, don't generate revenue. But we're trying to build relationships and we're trying to establish ourselves as a partner. And we mean that. And I know that there's other organizations out there in the industry that are tangential to LogiQuip that feel the same way. And so in sales, I try to be a value add person. I try to be an advocate. If I'm working with the sterile processing department and I get the chance to talk to the perioperative manager, I get the chance to talk to the financing team. I can speak to what other hospitals are doing and what truly what the department needs from a benchmark standpoint. I think we all have a perception of salespeople as used car salesmen, and I think we get that because there's some people out there that act like that. But I truly believe there's a lot of people in this industry, especially in the OR SPD space, that truly want to help. I mean, obviously we have a role, and our role is to sell, but I think people that take the long view on that and say, okay, I might work with a customer for 6, 9, 12 months, and we might not get a lot of revenue from them. But if we're helping them solve problems throughout building relationships with them, when they do a renovation or when they do an expansion or when they have something come up, I want them to call me versus me cold calling, somebody and trying to spark an interest that way.
Yeah. And practically speaking, as a clinical leader, and even as a frontline professional, there are storage changes and decisions that happen almost every single day. It's like, hey, we got a new tray. Where are we going to put it? That's a good question. And all of that has those ripple impacts like you mentioned. But if you're the resource that has the trust established and that relationship established where they're like, hey, we got this new 3-tray system and we have no idea where the best place is to put it. Can you help us? That's the place that you want to be in. And, to give you some props, here you are on a random Friday, spending an hour just dropping good education and insights into the industry is a great example of the kinds of things that every healthcare storage rep should be doing and trying to do. And you not only are joining us for the conference, but every month we're seeing expert series content come out from you on all the topics that we're going to be talking about today. So you're doing a great job, keep it up, number one. And you're a great example, for everyone else out there who needs to, I think, share a lot more of that knowledge so that on the clinical side, we can understand more why you tell us or the questions that you're asking us, because now we can contextualize the whole conversation into everything else that's rolling around in your brain, right? A couple comments here from the audience, and then we'll jump in here to the next section. It looks like Keisha Brock said she totally agrees on the building of sterile processing areas and what happens with the space being pulled away into other areas. I think like you mentioned pharmacy, but in her comment, like she mentioned the operating room, it is a limited equation with space, so there's only so much, and there are competing interests in those meetings of design. Is like, if you get that storage, that means I don't get it in the OR or in supply chain or in pharmacy. Because we've got multiple audiences tuning in to this session and on the podcast, we got the OR folks, we got the supply chain folks, we got sterile processing. Do you have any insights or tips around how to come to a amenable agreement and solution around this storage wars?
Yeah. There's a lot to that, and even like I would add another facet in supply chain and nursing is another competing perspectives. But the best thing, and the thing that I could not suggest more, is to get everyone in the room, and the conversation is around what is the optimal way to do this. Like, so we have to take off our tribal hats, our departmental hats, and put on our healthcare system hats or our hospital hats and say, okay, so we have a limited amount of space. What is the best way to do this? What does the SPD need as it pertains to instruments and disposable storage to pick cases? I mean, that's the reality. What does the OR need up in the core for emergent? And how much space do they need for that? How is supply chain going to stock those areas? What resources do they need in those areas? That conversation has to happen, and it has to happen, in my opinion, early and often. The most productive projects that I've been a part of, whether it's a whole hospital or adding an OR, is when you have multiple stakeholders at the table. So you'll have somebody from the OR, you'll have somebody from sterile processing, you'll have somebody from supply chain, you'll have somebody from anesthesia. You have all these people because they have storage, and they have needs that are tangential to the operating room. And how's that going to play out? What supplies are we going to put in the room? How are we going to put supplies in the room? What are we going to put in the core? How much? How do you want it set up? Do you want all of your sterile supplies down in SPD? Do you have a core large enough where you could put a lot of that case pick stuff in the core? It's very dynamic, and every situation is unique. That's part of why I love it. So we got to get out of the cookie cutter mindset of, okay, we're gonna do what we've always done. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. Whether that's from the hospital standpoint or from the planner standpoint, and talk about, in this context, with this building and our caseload, what's the optimal outcome?
That is a massive point, and I doubt we have a lot of architects who are tuning in live here. But if you know an architect, please send this episode. I want you to fast forward to just what Dustin said, and then to this comment. We got to drop the cookie cutter mindset of, I designed this hospital here with all the storage here, and they love it and it's going awesome. Because what that architect doesn't know, that the new hospital knows, is that at this hospital, it's the operating room that's picking cases. At this hospital, it's sterile process and supply chain that's picking cases, and that's happening in a completely different area. If you build the same hospital with the same storage, and you got different processes and teams and responsibilities, it's not going to work. And those are the insights, just like you mentioned, unless the critical stakeholders are in the room at the beginning, that's never going to surface until it's too late. And now we got a broken process that we have to do that. The workaround that everyone is always struggling to do and complain about. So that's a great point. Another question here from Joe Carey. Do you apply industrial engineering principles to the organization of a workspace or storage space? And if your answer is yes, can you please define what industrial engineering principles means for somebody like me?
So I don't, when he asked that question, I'm not sure about industrial engineering principles. If you can throw them in the chat, like what, maybe elaborate on that. But what I will say is, we do apply a lot of, manufacturing and lean principles into, the organization of workspace and storage space. So, and some of this is done already, like a cell flow in SPD with the work tables and the way that instruments flow. But yeah, I'm not formally trained in lean concepts, but we talk to customers and partners all the time about 5S'ing work areas and 5S'ing storage areas. We talk about lean principles of Kanban and pulling supplies up the chain versus pushing supplies out. So that there are principles to be applied for sure. So it just I guess
let me follow. Yeah, let me follow on that Kanban, because that's one of those words that is thrown around a lot. And I know you recently did a release on your expert series about the Kanban, like philosophy or process. Can you give us a baseline introduction to what folks mean when they say that and the application it has to this conversation around healthcare storage?
Yeah, so Kanban in healthcare solution is interesting. So people will use like Kanban boards sometimes in project management. And Kanban in itself in Japanese, if you logged in today and you're like, I'm going to learn Japanese, congratulations, we fulfilled the promise. But Kanban just means sign or billboard in Japanese. And so what we typically use it for, and what I think is known most predominantly in supply chain, is a trigger for reordering supplies. So if you think, and a lot of these concepts come from Toyota and the Toyota production system, but so if you imagine an assembly line of cars and they have, let's pick lug nuts. So they have lug nuts, and then halfway through a pallet of lug nuts, they'll have a cardboard piece that's red. And so they know when they get to that part of the lug nut thing, the red, that at that point they need to place the order for the other pallet of lug nuts, so that as the production line runs, when they get to the very bottom of that pallet, just in time, just as they're running out of that inventory, the next pallet of lug nuts arrive. That where a lot of healthcare storage is more of a push model. So where I'm going to push as much supply that I possibly can to sterile processing, or I'm going to push as much supply as I can to the clean supply rooms across the hospital, because I don't have a whole lot of time. So I'm going to go up there once and I'm going to fill it to the brim. The problem with that is you run into expired supplies. You have more inventory on the shelf than you need. You overstock shelves and you can't find it. But it's important to note that Kanban is a tool inside of a big tool belt of lean principles. And so I hear oftentimes people say, we're gonna implement a Kanban system, and that's great. But you have to consider what that means for your organization, both upstream and downstream. So if you're creating efficiency in one area, but driving inefficiencies downstream or upstream, or, you don't consider the entire picture of what you're going for, then it's not really a lean concept. You might have implemented a Kanban system, but your organization isn't necessarily leaner. Does that make sense?
It does. The whole time you're talking, I've been thinking about your pantry model, because I think you mentioned putting cards in there to go back to the grocery store, and I'm like, that makes a lot of sense, because you don't want to run out and need it if you could have been kind of cued and tipped off ahead of time that, oh yeah, we should probably go put that order, because then you got lead times, and especially like in the post-COVID or COVID world, like longer lead times and all kinds of like out of stock, back stock stuff. So it's good to get as much of a head start as you can to keep those supplies at the user side, and then also on the back end where your larger storage is.
And it's interesting. I was just going to say, it's interesting because you mentioned COVID and which is like a cuss word now, but if you mentioned it, so I'm gonna walk through that door. But
okay. My fault.
A lot of things move in pendulums, or swing back and forth. And if you think about it, like a lot of lean, the auto industry, changed. I'm in Michigan, so it's changed a lot in America. A lot of people went out of auto and into healthcare, and took a lot of principles with them. And so they would start applying lean metrics, and a lot of people started looking at supplies and labor as the two largest costs, and thinking about how we can mitigate some of those costs. They started driving inventory way down, and then COVID happened, and nobody could get any supplies. And so now people are starting to snap back the other way and say, "Well, we're never gonna run out." I mean, I walk into hospitals today, and I'm sure everyone could probably put in the chat here that they have thousands of gowns now, thousands of masks, and I understand that, but it's good to have a long view on that and say, okay, what is our use? So our usage spiked in 20 and 21. What's our long term usage? And I think where we were in depleting inventory and going as lean as we possibly can, and not having the safety stock really hurt a lot of people. And we don't need to go back that far, but there's also a tendency and a knee-jerk reaction to swing it back that way and overstock the shelf, because we don't have unlimited money. You talk about the pantry example. We don't have enough money to put 17 cases of paprika in the pantry, so we have to make a decision. So that's something to consider as well.
I actually, my wife makes fun of me because I cannot say the word paprika is how it comes out of my mouth.
Isn't it funny we all have words we can't say? I got a ton of them, so
it's crazy.
I'll start saying.
Yeah, all right. Try to drop it in the rest of the interview, make me feel better. So Joe Carey actually followed back up in the chat and said you did a great job in answering about that industrial engineering process. So that workflow that you described about the lean principles is spot on. So good job with that.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Joe.
You also, on that COVID piece, it's funny that we ended up talking about that, because that changed the buying patterns of our supply chain teams and our frontline clinical users that flow through supply chain. And I'm assuming that it has had an impact on how your team is selling and supporting based on those flow. Like you were just saying, hey, this is a weird thing. It's not going to be the long-term change, but did you see a lot of people change their storage practices in this time span? And if so, or if not, are they starting to change that model back in terms of just storage, or did everyone just kind of deal with what they got and then try to kind of cross your fingers and hope it goes well?
Yeah, so I have seen people start to change, and like particularly in ED and ICU, and that would make a lot of sense given where we've come out. But they have storerooms that are much like the sterile processing department that are locked in, landlocked, and so a lot of conversations in those departments of how okay, so we need to keep X amount of PPE on hand. We're not going to get caught in that position again. So, help me understand how I can fit 90 days of PPE, 30 days of PPE, whatever they want to hold in this building. That for sure is happening.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the other conversations. So like COVID conversations obviously has been big over the last 2 years, but what are the other big conversations around healthcare storage that you've had with customers or that y'all have had internally on your team?
Yeah, I would say it's twofold primarily, and we talked a lot about the first one. The first one is how do I do the same amount of work in less space? So, hospitals are adding more and more services, more and more doctors, more and more lines, generating more and more revenue, and not expanding the storage space. So, how help me function by adding, we're going to get these new doctors, we're going to get this new robot. So that's going to come with it, so many different instrument sets and so many more different disposables, and I'm already out of space. So help me.
That robot piece, I don't want to cut you off, but the robot piece, wow, that is such
every day. It's every day.
Challenge.
So, Da Vinci, SI, XI, like all the robot, people add robots, and I understand it. I get it. But there's so many, and that's another thing that doesn't really get considered, I don't think, well enough. Like when decisions are made on new technology, which it's so cool to see how healthcare is advanced. Like that's, it should. Yes and amen. But people don't consider, okay, now I have X amount of more disposables that I didn't have that now I need to support this new technology, and where are we going to put those?
Those are big. Those robotic arms are large, and the
video arms,
those trays are large. Yeah, like it's not a little trinket here that we can just shove like 100 of them in a bin. Like you're talking an expansive space for any kind of volume of robotic procedures.
I say one of the more predominant conversations I have is around Da Vinci storage. How am I going to store these instrument sets, and how I'm going to store these arms, and where we're going to put them? And the funny thing is, in the industry is starting to catch up, but really there wasn't a whole lot of solutions. Even so, a typical instrument set will fit on a 24-inch deep rack. Almost all the cassettes and wraps will do. Well, a Da Vinci instrument is 30 inches deep. So oftentimes you don't have a 30-inch deep shelf in your SPD, and so you have to turn it sideways, and you're taking up more real estate on that shelf, and then it's still only 14 or 16 inches wide. So now you're not utilizing that shelf as well. And there's all sorts of conversations around the peel pouching and how to get the control arms and the video arms and all those things to be stored more efficiently. In our industry, meaning storage, us and our competitors, it's one of those areas where I think we're all catching up and saying, okay, 30-inch rack, that's standard, but what are we going to do? How are we going to store these different disposables and these different pieces and parts that come along with it that we've never really had to manage before? So that's a conversation that wasn't in my notes, but that's a conversation that that's been a big conversation, and a conversation that will continue because we're going to keep coming up with innovative. No, that's my paprika.
There you
moment.
go, paprika.
Innovative
you got
ways.
your paprika.
Yeah, there we go. To do medicine, and with that's going to come these challenges, and we're lucky because we have a suite of.
It's not just storage, to your point about the Da Vinci and the robotics. It's the entire workflow in sterile processing. Like we have sinks that can't fit the arms and the trays. We have ultrasonics that can't fit the arms and the trays. We have case cards, which is technically storage, I guess, but we have case cards. Just like the shelf, you can't fit it in the way that you fit every other tray that's in your inventory. So yeah, it came on us much quicker than the industry itself was able to plan and to pivot. Like not just the department, like what you were describing, but yeah, the whole industry. Like, do we even have solutions that can solve that? And to your point, we're starting to catch up finally, but it's not like robotics are that new. Like they were even back when I started in 2009. That was one of the first procedures I ever watched as a brand new technician. It was a robotic case. So it's been around a while, and yet here we are still 2022, and it's not uncommon to still have all the challenges that you've been describing.
Yeah, for sure.
Where do you see our industry starting to get things right in terms of healthcare storage? Because I know we've been talking about some challenges, but what are some positives that we can share?
Yeah, there are some. So I would say something that's evolved in me as I've been, out in the field more, because, I mentioned I did a lot of sales planning, and that was more tactical. Like, I've gotten out now, and now I'm starting to understand a lot of the application stuff. And for the longest time, I would walk in, when I was trained and taught, you don't stack blue wrapped instruments, but everybody stacks them. So I would
dirty little secret.
I know, right? So I would go out to customers, and we would do drawings, and I would meet with them and say, the regulations and recommendations say that you should not double stack. Do you want me to build that into the solution? And like, oh no, we've been doing it. That's the way we've always done it. It's fine. It's not a big deal. That conversation has changed to the point where it was the exception when people were saying, no, I don't want to double stack, make sure that everything is set up appropriately, to now it's the exception when I have people say, oh, don't worry about it. I couldn't even tell you the last time that somebody said that was okay. And kudos to you and your team and everyone out there that has been shining the light. The sunlight's the best disinfectant, as people will say.
Right.
So you guys have shown a light on that. The industry in a whole has looked at that and said, it's a real thing. And protecting that sterile integrity. And there's a lot that goes into that, just more than just double stacking, that people are starting to take into account, how they're handled, how they're put in and out of the case cart, how they're handled when they get to the OR, the type of shelf that they go on. People
Right.
I think underestimate, just by putting it on a standard flat wire shelf and running it on and off that ridge, that it has to come off day in and day out, creates trauma to that blue wrap. And so, looking for solutions, and we have one. We're not the only one. There's other companies out there that have these solutions that mitigate that, the damage that happens to the blue. So that's where I think one area. And the other area is scope storage. That's another one where, like, when I first started getting out in the field, and one of the things I almost said from the first question you asked me about, like, my what the heck moment,
Okay.
was in an endo area. I walked in, and they just had scopes hung up on the wall and on wood racks with, like, I don't remember if it was plywood or not, but I mean, I have a list of hospitals not to go to.
Exact example.
Sure it's for you, like, so that conversation has changed, and people are, I think, treating that as the instrument that it is, and storing it and taking that as serious as it ought to be. It's unfortunate
that's a huge highlight. Anybody tuning in, go take a look at how your endoscopes are being stored, and take a close look, and have the industry guidelines right there beside you as you're looking, and say, are we compliant with what this is saying? And if not, not only because it's a massive citation risk, and I'm about to ask you, that's the next question I'm going to get to, but it's a big citation risk, but it's also just a huge patient safety risk. Like, you cannot be playing around with those devices out of all the other devices, because of everything that we know is going on inside and outside of those scopes. So please, this is the big takeaway out of everything else that we've talked about. Go check your scope storage, and please try your best to fix it today. Couple of minutes left here. The hour is flying by, but I want to talk about the risk of citations, because I know that drives a lot of storage decisions. Mm-hmm. It's either we can't fit it and it's causing efficiency issues, or, oh crap, Joint Commission is coming next month and we know we will get cited if we don't fix it. Please come help. So what are those conversations like? Like, what are the top couple of points that folks call you and they're like, we're at risk, or we already got cited. Can you help us get the fix?
Yeah. It's funny. We had the saying for a long time here that the Joint Commission is one of our strongest sales reps, because every time they go into hospital, we get phone calls from people saying, so I would break it down to this. Most often it's supplies that are too tall on the shelf. So, and people interpret this a number of different ways. So I would recommend, look it up in the Joint Commission. There's different fire codes out about this, but keeping supplies 18 inches from the ceiling, that's the biggest thing. And so when they have to do that, when they have to change their perception on that, then we're coming in and trying to help them find, because they're obviously doing that because they don't have room, or else they wouldn't put it up that high. No one can reach it. Is helping them find more space. And then the second largest one is shelf liners on the floor, or 10 inches. So all sterile supplies should be at least 10 inches off the floor. There should be a barrier between the sterile supplies and the floor. So there's plastic inlays. We get calls all the time. We need 50 inlays here tomorrow. So, so, do an audit, make sure that you have all your supplies less than 8 or more than 18 inches from the ceiling, more than 10 inches off the ground, with the barrier in between the bottom of the supplies and the floor. And that's to protect it from being splashed with mops and all the.
That was going to be my follow up. Yeah.
So it's a clean area, but you still don't want those supplies to get wet or dirty. Card covers is another one. Supplies need to be covered if they're going through public areas. They're being transported. They ought to be covered. And so card covers are a big one. Supplies need to be locked, and that's a ever changing thing. I think stuff for ultrasounds, the jelly that they put on is now considered, in some areas needs to be locked up, which I'd never heard of until a customer, told me about it. So there's, medication, needles, like all those different things that need to be locked up. Oftentimes, and that's more on the floors than it, maybe it doesn't pertain necessarily to sterile processing in the OR, but making sure that, all of the supplies that need to be locked up, are locked up. That's another big citation risk. And then we talked about, scope storage and with ST91 coming out. And so those I would say are the big offenders.
On that, on the locking piece, you reminded me of an article I wrote a couple years ago. Part of the title is Stop, Lock, and Roll, and it was about locking your case cards. And a number of reasons that I outlined in the article, for ensuring that what we put in that case card actually makes it to that patient. Mm-hmm. And I love our OR folks tuning in today, but when you pillage those case cards, the impact it can have on all the other two follow cases in the workflow for sterile processing. So I think there's a lot of conversation and good conversation that can be had about that accountability piece with locking, or even having the ability to lock your case cards or your cabinets. Even if you don't want to, it's probably a good idea to buy some solutions in some places that you could lock if you decided to store something new in there, instead of saying, oh, yeah, that would have been nice, but we just bought this old system and it can't lock, right? Yeah. In the final couple of minutes, is there any topic that is on the horizon, or there's any big trend that you think the audience should be paying attention to when it comes to sterile storage or to healthcare storage in general? Like, it's bigger than just sterile storage, and that's why we call it's about healthcare storage, because there's all kinds of clean storage and supply storage and, scrub storage, et cetera. But is there anything that we didn't cover today, or maybe something that we just kind of touched on, that you think, in the future we need to chat about this, or you need to be aware that this is coming down the pipeline?
That's a great question. If you'd asked this to me a month ago, I would have said scope storage. And I still think, even with ST91, those recommendations are still relatively lenient as relative to the ones in Canada and Europe. Okay. So I think there could be still more to be done there. But people
relatively lenient. And you need to talk to those GI docs who had a beef with the new guidelines. That's a whole other topic. But
yeah, no, that's why when I said there's some people that might disagree with me, that's, and I understand, like, when, a scope cabinet has gone from $5,000 to $30,000 or $50,000, and I understand that, but it doesn't change the reality of where we're at. I mean, you got
air circulation, you got locking, you got scanning, you got like UV disinfection, some of those babies, like you got a lot of options, right? But yeah, we're catching up. It's not like we're going from the 2000s to the 2022s. We're going from like the 1970s and 80s storage, finally catching up to where we should have been 20 years ago for scope storage. So yeah, it's a step and it's an investment, but it's something that, again, I don't know why we had to wait for a guideline to tell us those kinds of things, but that is how healthcare moves some days. So anyways, fantastic session and conversation. We scratched the surface of healthcare storage. So many questions we didn't get to and topics we didn't get to jump into. But that's the great part about the Expert Series, because you get to hear from Dustin every month, 2022. And I'm assuming you or someone from your team is going to be at the conference in San Antonio, the HSPA conference. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yep, we'll be there.
Beautiful. So if you didn't get your question,
Bobby Oliver.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just say Bobby Oliver will be. Bobby. Those that don't, he'll be down there. And Stephanie Deegan will be down there, and we'll be down there for sure. And I don't know if this is appropriate. I'll just take a second and just thank everyone for logging in. I see 47 on the attendee list, and just, it's awesome that you all would take your time to sit and consider healthcare storage. It's a step in the right direction. Beyond Clean, Hank, Brett, the entire team, thank you guys for shedding a light. Like I said, sunlight's the best disinfectant. So you guys are doing a great job on that, and couldn't be happier to be a part of it. So
awesome. And with that, we will turn it back over to our host.
I just want to say thank you to everybody for tuning in again to this awesome presentation. Thanks again to Dustin, and I guess we'll even give you a thanks, Hank. Good job, you guys, for a really engaging conversation about sterile storage and just the intricacies of figuring out in healthcare. A lot of times we're just having to figure out how to wing it, and thank you for bringing up a lot of those considerations to our attention. And thanks again for tuning in. See you shortly.